All right. So let's get on with Yale. I want to start with this one again. What kind of the plan is to go through all of the Yale prompts and questions in the order. We'll spend considerably longer on a couple than some others, even talk about the short answers more or less like in quick succession. But I do think it's important to start with a couple of things. The first one is that the first essay is not located with the short takes and essays. It is instead located in the academics part of the application. So in the part where it asks you about what fields of interest you're most interested in, you do have a 200-word essay that kind of starts this off. It asks you, and again, reading here, tell us about a topic or idea that excites you and is related to one or more of the academic areas you selected above. Why are you drawn to it? I would also like to say, again, as I think Titania and I can kind of get on with this one, but as Yale folks, they are one of the few schools who correctly grammatically articulates it as 200 words or fewer instead of less. But that's just the grammarian in me. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the job of this essay is. It is in some ways similar to a why major essay that you would see at other schools that are more conventional and like, why do you want to study what you have indicated? So there is a degree to which this essay needs to kind of fill that job by structuring a different kind of essay. There are some schools that have basically the same question with slightly different wording, and they frame it as like an idea or experience. At Yale, it is a topic or idea. So ideas only, experiences, you can use it to frame your idea, but it's not about an experience. My recommendation here is that you find a very narrow thing. Your idea needs to be small. So this might be a specific breakthrough that has just been announced. It might be a new topic or a challenge that's kind of come out or something that's kind of newsworthy within your field more recently than others. It doesn't have to be like immediate, but like I think if you're picking something that's kind of current, a current question in your field, it gives you a lot more to talk about. That's not a requirement of the question. That is advice based on the potential that that gives you for how you write your essay. So again, pick a narrower idea, like a theory, a hypothesis, a breakthrough, some kind of new discovery, that kind of thing. And then why is that exciting? So like, what are the implications of that? Why does that matter to the types of study you want to do and what you're interested in? And then why does that matter to you specifically and how you want to approach whatever your major is? So it needs to be kind of relevant, but maybe not specifically related to what you want to study, but it needs to be relevant to that. And that's where you kind of say it at the end. And then at the very end, even though it's not technically part of this question, I often encourage students to have like a sentence or two that's like, how will you pursue that idea or those questions further at Yale? So it's just like this much, why school, or at least related to your major at the very end of the essay.
I'd love to hear some examples that you've used recently with students, because the idea, like a discovery, can make more sense in things like, science or math, but might be more difficult for a student who's interested in, say, philosophy or literature. So what are some experiences, or what are some examples that you've used with students that work here? I would love to hear your take on it.
So like an example might be, well, first of all, new discoveries and arguments are being made within every field. So if you're thinking about like, what are people in my field researching and publishing on and talking about right now? I was a kind of classics and English double major. And a couple of years ago, for example, one of the, again, technological and science breakthroughs was essentially the use of using high resolution images and AI to start deciphering some of the Herculaneum scrolls that had been burned and buried, and that you couldn't unroll them. Physically, you could not unroll them to read them, but you can use the technology of AI to image them, scan them, and start reconstructing them. For the sake of a kind of classicist, provides the opportunity to use these emerging technologies in ways that completely revolutionize and introduce huge bodies of new text to our understanding of the history, classical literature, classical thinking, and whatever. So thinking about in that case, like, why is this exciting? Like part of what the idea is like this technology or this topic, this technology, the potential that has for increasing the volume of text that we have for these periods in ways that we have not seen for centuries. And then what that means to like what I might want to study in Roman law and what that has the potential to do there, and why Yale or its collections related to Near East or classical archaeology might be an exciting place to do that. Right? How can we use these to understand manuscripts? Again, I was a medievalist. What are you going to do? To understand manuscripts, to think about like the problems of palimpsest and lacunae, of kind of missing text. How do we use this kind of stuff to do that? So it's like taking this thing, which I don't do. I am not an AI person. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not an imaging, but thinking about the potential that that new development has on completely revolutionizing the work of old texts. You might also think about like an argument that someone is putting forward in a kind of literary sense, like, or a theoretical sense. Is there a new
Mhm.
theorist who's asking us to think about or think about something differently?
I think that the method that you're talking about with a new discovery allows for a level of sophistication in your approach to the question and also to your explanation of what you care about that maybe discovering something that people have been talking about for ages might not have. I was an ethnic studies major, so, talking about, like, intersectionality was fairly new at the time, and so talking about how I saw that in current events, that was definitely a bit more cutting edge than I just discovered the existence of, I don't know, redlining because it's a way to show that you genuinely have enthusiasm, you genuinely have excitement because you are excited, so therefore you started researching. You're excited, so therefore you looked into it a little bit more. And that's the kind of enthusiasm that these extremely elite schools want to see. They have lots of people who are excited. They need people who are really excited.
And again, and the idea tapped in, like half of students who go to college end up majoring in something that they don't list on their application. That's
Mhm.
fine. That's expected. But the idea is that like if you're already paying attention to stuff now and you're tuned in and excited and intellectually engaged in these things, then whatever you end up doing, you're going to be equally engaged with. What are people talking about that makes you excited? What are the implications for that? What's the next step for you in that? And
Right.
like how you'll pursue that in college.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah,
keeping reading in general is a good habit that we really try to encourage here. Reading newspapers, trying to stay updated with what's happening in the world is especially something that we encourage here. This is an even more like specific form of staying updated with what's in the world. Like if you have your application persona, if you have a thing that you're expressing about yourself, what's going on in that? If you're interested in this, what are you learning about it?
I would also say that this essay tonally is intellectual. This is where you flex your intellectual muscles. Show them how you think, what kind of critical thinking, what kind of advanced and mature understanding of the implications, the critical implications and the analytical implications of something. This is where you show that off. And I think that is the challenge of this essay, to say, like, why does this matter? What are the implications? How does it matter to me and what I want to study?
I think that actually that you bring up a really good point in the difference between, say, Yale and Harvard. These kinds of questions show a little bit about what these colleges value in an applicant. Harvard was, how are you going to use your Harvard education in the
What's your
future?
future?
What's your
Yeah.
future like? What are you going to lead? Yale is, what kind of thing have you been really nerding out about lately? Like, they really want people who are geeks, like people who are really interested in things, not necessarily so that it can carry it into some bright future, although you totally can do that. But what is the thing that you want to learn? And so framing your essay, or at least just keeping that in mind as you're writing these supplements, is very helpful, I think. And speaking of Yale,
Yeah. You want to take
let's
on the YL?
why Yale? Or more specifically, reflect on how your interests, values, and slash or experiences have drawn you to Yale. Parentheses, 125 words or fewer.
The larger substance of the essay is the same as it has been for a long time, but they have changed the wording of the specific prompt this year. Yale admissions itself has published, they have a kind of podcast where they sometimes like will publish things that talk about this. They actually do have an episode where they talk about their rationale for this change. So if you're applying to Yale and you have the time, I do encourage you to go back and listen to some of that. It's useful to hear admissions offices talk in their own words from their own perspective about why they ask the questions they ask. So worth doing, worth noting if you're a Yale applicant. All right, I'll turn it back over. You were the Yale
Yeah.
undergraduate, right?
I was the Yale undergraduate.
Well, and tell me what you did.
I think with Yale, the thing that you do want to display, like any college, right, is why you think this school in particular is really cool. For me, that was literally I walked into the library on a campus tour, and you walk down Sterling, and the tour guide was saying that it was modeled after a church, and I said, "Wow, a church to knowledge? This is the kind of place I wanna go." So, whatever kind of weird, like, personal experience you had that made you think, "Wow, Yale could be a really cool place for me," is something that belongs here. It's not just like we said about Harvard, it's not just the prestige. I would say Yale is maybe less interested in people who are looking for the prestige of Yale. They don't want people who are, for lack of a better word, clout chasing. They want people who genuinely are interested in learning. And so, what about your life has made you interested to learn? What about your life has made you curious about the way that the world works in ways that Yale has resources to answer? How do you perceive Yale as a place that uniquely can help you find the answers that you're looking for? And so, in that sense, again, you have to do your research very thoroughly. For these why questions, you always have to do your research thoroughly. But I would say it goes a little bit deeper than let me list this like extracurricular that I think is cool. Let me list this professor that I think is neat. In my opinion, I would say because it's talking about how your experience, etc., has drawn you to Yale, the idea is that you are being pulled to Yale in a way. There's something that's specific. It's not just how does I want to participate in Dwight Hall to do community service. It's I want to participate at Dwight Hall because the relationship between New Haven and Yale is a complex one that I think is worth solving as a model for other wealth disparity community issues. Something like that. It's important to kind of be specific about how Yale, above all other schools or above other schools in general, can provide the thing that you're looking for. You don't have to write a new essay from scratch if you've already written like a why have my interests drawn me to X school. But you do have to be very specific about how your interests parallel with specific interests that aren't about these big famous things. At least that's where I'm coming from.
I do think that's extremely true. I would say that there are a few schools, and Yale is one of them, for which understanding the educational and community culture of a place is preeminent in the why school essay. Yale and Dartmouth are the two that I think are probably the most, this is the most true for. And it also is true that those are some of the shortest you're going to write if you're applying to both. So like I
Mhm,
think that there's a big factor about that. You need to understand kind of like not just the opportunities and the details that Yale has, but like you need to understand what Yale is about. And you
mhm,
need to make a case for like why that's the place for you. And that like what you value and like why Yale that is the place for you. So just to kind of like summarize again, kind of what they said about the restructuring, they wanted students to focus a little bit more on themselves and less about listing details about Yale and the why Yale essay. So you really actually do want to organize and structure your essay for Yale around what you want out of an education in
mhm,
college. Like,
mhm.
why are you going to college?
That's a
And
very
like,
important
why
question to
is
think about
Yale the
in
place
general.
to do it? That's
Right.
kind of like what this is. And if you're going to college because you're just like, I want to be a businessman and like, I need business connections, Yale's not the school for you. There are schools for you. Yale's
Mhm,
not the one, right?
right.
But if you're just like, I want to understand these complicated issues and tackle these big social problems and understand myself better and like whatever those things are, like those types of things kind of lend themselves to the opportunities, tone, and educational experience at Yale. So I think the first step for this question, and it's probably for like every question, but like it's more apparent in this question, is like literally, what do I want? Why am I going to college for 4 years? What do I want to, how do I want to change? What do I want to learn? What value is there for me in this experience of college?
Mhm,
And then once you kind of articulated what that is for you, what your values are, what your interests are, then you're able to then connect those to the details at Yale that best support them. And if you find yourself struggling to connect to Yale, the answer to that might be Yale's not the school. There
Right.
are other schools that are equally elite and equally prestigious that have different ideas about what a college education is. And like that might be more in line with what you're thinking. Start with that self reflection and then connect that to like, why is Yale the place to get this, do this, contribute this way, and be part of that community?
Exactly. And I think that's a really cool place to compare and contrast it to Harvard. Yale and Harvard have the eternal rivalry, yada, yada. But Yale and Harvard also clearly have very different definitions of what they think you're going to college for or what they want you to think about as you're going to college. Harvard wants you to think about how am I going to use this Harvard education in the future? You're not necessarily doing a lot of like inner reflecting and like, how am I going to like learn? You're thinking, how do I carry this education out into the world where in the future, beyond school, I can do all of these things. Yale is asking you to reflect inward. And so that's kind of asking you to look back in a way. And so to kind of focus on you now and think about how you want to approach school as a place where you learn and explore, where you take parts of yourself and look at them and research them. Take a look at how you think that Yale could be a place where you could really unpack these things or explore these things that are interesting to you. So I think that's actually a really interesting way to highlight the differences between these schools specifically, schools in general, and a good way to kind of frame how to approach this essay.
Yeah. I would say as we transition into talking about the short takes for Yale,
Mhm.
I do think that's a good practice to do generally. Use the prompts that a school is asking you to try to understand what the school is looking for a little bit better. And like, I don't want you to do a whole lot of hand wringing and a whole lot of meta thinking because I think that's likely to, at this point, send you down a rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
I do think it's useful as a kind of insight into what a school thinks that they are about
Mm.
and whether or not you feel like that's the most appropriate fit for you in terms of is that what you're about and kind of using that as a guide not only to select at the kind of and which schools you want to prioritize but also like how you're approaching the questions and the topics and like your language about the next 4 years and what you're looking for.
I would also
All right.
say that
Yeah.
in terms of not panicking, again, do not panic. If you don't come up with something right away, that doesn't mean the school is wrong for you. It doesn't mean that, oh, shoot, I can't think about how my interests have drawn me to Yale. Yale's not the place for me. It's okay to take your time. It's okay to not be totally sure. You're,
Use the prompts to do the self-reflection, right?
yeah.
This is your opportunity. Like these are questions that a lot of students have never really had to ask themselves before. So it's
Mhm.
okay if the answers don't come immediately. That's
Right.
okay. But the idea is just like think about them. Ask
Mhm.
yourself these questions and do your best to try to answer them like in and then use the revision and the thinking that comes with that revision to like advance your own thinking. The more you do this, the faster the other essays are going to come. You'll get better at it. You get better out of it fast, quite
Yeah.
frankly, if you really work at it.
Yeah, as it turns out, practicing is a skill that can be applied to all of these things, including writing supplemental essays for college applications.
All right, short takes. I'm going to kind of just like plow through these really quickly. I do think that in general, any time you're asked to do these kind of quick answer, not even necessarily full sentence questions, the it is important to understand like what they're getting at, but it is also important to understand that even when they're fun, like USC, less like Yale, but like USC or something like that, even when they're fun, they are trying to get insight into you. You need to understand for yourself what you want them to learn about you from the answer that you give. So I actually admire short answers or short takes quite a lot. I think you get a lot of information, an idea of like what a student's like from the way they answer these, but you need to be deliberate about it. They can be fun, but you need to be deliberate about how you're using them. Okay.
Right. So what is a short take? Just for the audience.
So the short take description in Yale is that it's like 200 characters. They say
Mhm.
approximately 35 words. It is never 35 words. So 200 characters, use that as your guide. And you're basically giving kind of quick response answers that compress what you're trying to say. Again,
Mhm.
some of these can be quite fun, like best movie of all time, famous person or fictional character you'd most like to room with, song that is your soundtrack of your life right now. So some of them can be kind of fun that way, where they're clearly getting more at like personality. Some of them are much more serious. And I think Yale leans more in that direction than some other schools. But
Mhm.
either way, they're trying to get a sense of quick answers that give me insight into what you care about and how you think,
Mhm.
right? So for Yale, 200 characters. I'm going to read through these all and then we'll kind of move through them one at a time. The first one is simply what inspires you. Second one is if you could teach any college course, write a book, or create an original piece of art of any kind, what would it be? Third, other than a family member, who is someone who has had a significant influence on you and what has been the impact of their influence? And then four, what is something about you that is not included elsewhere in your application? All right.
A classic.
I'm actually gonna I want to see what Titania has to say about the what inspires you, mostly because of my own rage at this question. But let's see what you have to say first.
All right. What inspires you, I think, can be a tricky question to answer if you're answering it head on. Like, what is my greatest inspiration? What inspires you? Not the most fun of questions, but I think thinking about what inspires you to do something, what inspires you to think about something in a way. You don't have to what inspires you wholly as a person. I think that's a trap, personally. I think that's a trap that is really easy to fall into because of the phrasing of this question.
I think it's very easy for this to come off for students' first answers to this to sound very hallmarky. It is not a greeting card. It is not a thank you card. It is not a get well card. It is not a card of any kind. I agree with you. My biggest soapbox with this question is the like what you do because you
Mhm.
are inspired is the most substantive part of
Right.
your answer. What you choose to lead in to that, what you do should be interesting and notable and hopefully not completely unique, but kind of unique to you, or at
Mhm.
least a little bit unpredictable. But the like, what does it inspire you to do? How does it galvanize you is important. What values you have
Mhm.
needs to come out. Like we talked in Harvard, their disagreement essay, a little bit about this idea of you need to show what you care about, what matters to you. This is kind of that question, very poorly worded. What do you care about? What aspect of that is inspiring? And then to do what? And that to
Right.
do what is where I think we see the most payoff in your
Right.
answer to this.
Because I think if you just leave it as what inspires you, you can list a whole bunch of things that you think are really cool, but if they don't lead to anything, you're not getting an answer. It's not a short answer. You're just like a vague list of cool things. I really try to encourage my students to be as concrete as possible, to try and land on something less abstract. Like, is it an action that somebody took that was where they were kind to you? Or is it like something that you participated in that changed your mind and led you to try and do something else? Connecting it, I think you're right, connecting it to action, connecting a concrete thing to an actionable thing shows that you do things, one, and you care about things, two, and you think about the consequences of certain things and do stuff based on them. You don't idly stand by. I think that's a really important thing to try and emphasize, that you don't just care and not really do anything, you
Do.
care and then do.
And I think that's even more important at Yale, where I do
Mhm.
think there is a greater than average interest in social awareness, social action, improving the world around you, and contributing positively and working toward equity and equality and justice. I think
Right.
there is a kind of greater emphasis at Yale in that than there is. I mean, it's valuable everywhere, but I
Mhm.
think there is a greater value of that at Yale. And so that I think that kind of connection is useful. When it comes to the college course question, first of all, I actually the write a book or original piece of art, if that makes sense for you, maybe most students I think probably need to lean toward the college course.
Yep.
My advice on this one, it needs to be something that taps into some niche specialty that you have. Show your personality, show your knowledge. What do you know that a lot about?
Mhm.
Maybe that's predictable, maybe that's not predictable. You in your head need to understand what department is this course offered in? How does it fit? If you need inspiration, browse the course catalog,
Mhm.
right? Like, how do they frame topics or titles for courses? So, if you want to teach a class on adolescents in comic books. Maybe I'm approaching this as a psych class and thinking about this as developmental psychology. Maybe
Mhm.
I'm thinking about this as like an American studies style course and thinking about what it means in these kind of narratives of youth in this culture. Whatever
Mhm.
it is, you need to know what department and therefore like what methodology and what style am I approaching it in that probably needs to match with whatever your field of interest is. And then like what kind of cool seminar would you teach? And you need to
Mhm.
think about it as a seminar, a
Mhm.
discussion based small classroom about probably something that's a kind of niche topic with specific questions. That will give the most insight into how you think and what you think about, which is again the goal of this question.
Occasionally, if you have too many interests or just have a lot of interests, this can also be a point to talk about a different but like semi-related interest that you might have. A student that I worked with was largely focused on neuroscience, but used this part to talk about his parallel love of trains, which he had actually mentioned in his personal essay. So he talked about game theory and trains, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Not only because I love both public transit and games, but also because I think it's a really clever way to show that, you've thought about the different parts of your life in this very academic way. I think doing something that is both related and also not related to your area of interest or your main stated area of interest, it can be valuable.
If at all possible, sound like a real college class.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. That is huge.
imagine that you're gonna, like, actually pitch this class and teach it. It should be something you're excited to maybe teach, right?
Right.
Think about it like a real one, and again, browse the catalog if you need inspiration. Alright, the third question is someone who has a significant influence on you.
Mhm.
They do specify not a family member. For schools that ask this question and don't specify, it should still be someone who is not a family member.
Mhm.
I would also say that there are categories of people who have clearly had a significant influence on a lot of people that you should attempt to avoid if possible.
Yeah.
Teachers, coaches, more conventional categories of mentors. Like, for sure, you should be thanking these people and letting them know that they matter to you, but also they predictably matter to you. And kind of the odds that what you have to say about your teacher and the influence they have had on you is going to be similar to the way a lot of other people's teachers have had an influence on them.
Mhm.
The ideal opportunity here is that you're able to highlight someone who's not obvious and be thoughtful about and reflect on the way that they've impacted you in your life.
Mhm.
And like be specific again, kind of like the what it inspires you to do, but like what has been the impact of their influence? Like what is different about you? What have you done that is different? How do you see the
Mhm.
world in a way that's different because you have engaged with this person? And again, look beyond the obvious, brainstorm beyond the obvious. My recommendation here is that like start making a list and
Mhm.
throw out the first 6 or 7. Those are the most obvious people that most people are gonna come up with or some
Mhm.
equivalent in 6 or 7. Dig at the people who are in, like, 8, 9, 10 on your list
Mhm.
and, like, think about, like, why do those people matter to me? And that's likely to be a little more interesting.
How would you feel about somebody who wanted to say a celebrity or a politician or, like, someone very well known?
Yeah. I have seen good versions of that, and I
Mhm.
have seen versions of that have worked. So, it is not disallowed by the question, for
Mhm.
sure. I do think that picking people you have an interpersonal relationship with and know face to face generally is a better choice than
Right.
someone who is famous. It's the same thing with the teacher, coach kind of category where like
Mhm.
your reasons for picking that person might actually be more unique. And if you pick one of them, you do need to dig at that a little bit more. And you
Mhm.
certainly, again, you can include them. And I have definitely had people admitted to Yale with those types of people that they highlight. I
Mhm.
think that is not maximizing the potential of the question.
Right.
So, and again, not every question needs to be absolutely maximized
Yeah, you don't need to
necessarily.
min-max every single
Um,
essay.
but I think it's good, at least at the stage of brainstorming and picking people to really push yourself to pick someone you know personally
Mhm.
and someone who is not an obvious choice as an influential person. And if you're able to do that, you're probably going to get someone who is more interesting, memorable, and particular to you. But if you really, really struggle, I would still say a more conventional category of person, but someone that you know personally is a better choice than a celebrity.
Gandhi,
Yeah. Oh,
like,
please don't pick Gandhi.
please
Um,
do not pick Gandhi.
so like And if you end up picking someone who is famous, it needs to be someone who you're probably informing them about. Someone who is not so famous that your reader knows who they are. This is someone who is particular to you, right? Why do they matter to you? I would still prefer someone who you know personally. All right. Then the last question. This is your roommate question of the Yale essay. This is where you get a chance to pick something that really highlights something about you that is otherwise not does not otherwise have an obvious place in your application. I
Mhm.
prefer this to be very fun, not required of the question. Like you can highlight an achievement you haven't highlighted before. I don't recommend it.
I don't
I
recommend
think
that either.
this is a place, again, this is the place for the wedding cakes
Right.
and the skydiving and the belted good place cast or whatever it is about you that's just kind of quirky and weird and particular to you and something you love, like love's the word for Yale, something you
Yes.
love and care about, but that is not obviously part of a college application.
I sincerely also think just like maybe not the sillier, but the more unusual because you said like weirdo last time. I would say silly, but maybe that's not always the vibe.
It needs to be sincere. It can
Right.
be weird and it can be silly, but
Right.
you need to be sincere about it,
It could be weird and
right?
silly if you also
So
feel that you are weird and silly,
if
perhaps.
if if you have spent dozens of hours building a cosplay costume for a
Uh-huh.
character that you love or a series that you love, that love is real and sincere and you love it and you built this because you love it. And just
Mhm.
because it's a cosplay, like just because you're kind of play this kind of character in an anime or in whatever, I think needs to come from a very real, sincere place. But
Mhm.
how others might see that, it doesn't have to be serious.
I do have a question about that. I guess kind of like anime and K-pop, which might have like a little bit more of a stigmatized reputation in a more general public sense. How would you feel about including those here? I'm a big K-pop fan, or, my Crunchyroll account has many, many hours logged on it, something like that.
I think those two examples are too vague, the way you
Mhm.
worded them, but I have
Right.
no problem with the content. I mean, there's like a K-pop club at Yale,
Yeah, there is. There's a
right?
K-pop class at Yale.
Like, Yale's not going to stigmatize you for liking K-pop. They're going to be unimpressed if your answer for what is interesting about you is that you love K-pop because they're going to be like, yeah, well, so does everybody else at this school, right? So, like, the problem with that is not that it's like stigmatized. The problem with
Uh-huh.
that is like everybody. So, like,
Right.
it's about picking your thing. Like, what is your thing that you
Mhm.
like? And again, I like this idea of like investing time. Like, what have you
Mm.
put time into and love into? And that's the stuff I care about
Right.
because I put time into it, right?
Mhm. I see your point.
All right. So
Alright.
the last of the Yale essays is the long one. And this is a
Mhm.
big part of the reason why we chose Yale is because Yale has this kind of longer reflective essay that is different from anything that you saw at Harvard and sort of different than you see at a lot of other schools. And so I think it's important to understand kind of what the particular challenges of this essay are and how to approach those as well. I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to kind of read your options and go ahead.
So, the essay prompt is 400 words or fewer, and there are 3 different prompts to choose from. The first is reflect on a time you discussed an issue important to you with someone holding an opposing view. Why did you find the experience meaningful? This may sound familiar. 2. Reflect on your membership in a community to which you feel connected. Why is this community meaningful to you? You may define community however you like. And number 3, reflect on an element of your personal experience that you feel will enrich your college. How has it shaped you? This one also may seem a little familiar. So these are the 3 options you've got to choose from.
I think there are a couple of things to consider here. Again, first, if you are applying to Yale, it is very likely, whether you're applying to Harvard or not, that you have topics or essays of a different length, not quite 400 words, for the discussing an issue important to you with someone who holds an opposing view, as well as the kind of personal or lived experience essay at the bottom. You will then know whether or not you have a topic and an experience and a choice that you think will reward a longer essay, right? Like,
Right.
is your topic something that you like, you care about? Do you have interesting things to say about it that you would like to use additional words to unpack? The important thing to kind of keep in mind about a 400 word reflective essay is that, unlike a 150 word reflective essay, you need layers of nuance and takeaway.
Mm.
It is not simply, let me tell you a story and give you the takeaway. I mean, I guess you could technically do that, but that is unlikely to impress anyone at Yale. They're looking for these like layered reflections that kind of do the thinking with them. Harvard's more direct, 150 words. What is it? What did you think? What's your conclusion about that? This is more like unfold this for us and show us how it is meaningful to you.
Right.
So, if, for example, you do have a situation or a conversation where you had this kind of disagreement with someone on a view that you care very deeply about,
Mhm.
there is a lot of potential for that at Yale. Again, we've talked about Yale being a school that really is interested in social issues, social justice, equality kind of questions. And those are topics that are often subject of disagreement. And so using one of those to kind of help unfold your own thinking, but also your own reflection about that. And then how do you derive meaning out of that, for, especially for your future and how
Mhm.
you engage with others and whatever you want to do. There is a lot of reward there. But again, by this point, you probably know whether you have that experience that you want to talk more about or not.
Mhm.
Given how uncomfortable this essay topic makes people, most people choose the or not.
Or not.
So, but if you're someone who does have it, if you're that person, you're just like, no, 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 I have this discussion. It's really good. This could be a really great place to unpack that a little bit. Same thing with the personal experience, where you kind of know what your topic is. You've kind of probably written about it for other schools. This is a place where do I want to add more nuance, more complication, more thinking? This is the kind of place where, like, if we were to revisit like Titania's kind of example of like talking about being a member of or like being kind of ethnically Vietnamese, but not feeling like a part of that culture or community, there's a
Mhm.
lot more opportunity in this essay to kind of unfold that disconnect. Like, this is what it means to kind of be identified ethnically as Vietnamese, but like these are my experiences and the ways that like my personal experiences and my relationship to my community or my own ethnicity is different
Mhm.
and complicated. And this is kind of like how that difference has kind of shaped me in an interesting way and how it brings that to Yale. So kind of you will know by the time you get to Yale whether or not you have those topics and whether you think you'd like to spend more time thinking in a more nuanced way about them. We're
Mhm.
probably going to focus a little more on the community, but is there anything you want to say about those two topics, given that we've already kind of talked about them a little bit?
Yeah, I think just to speak a little bit more on the nuance and the depth that you were talking about, it's because you have so much space. 400 words is quite a few words when you're talking about an application essay. It's almost the length of the personal statement. Like not
Two
almost, but
thirds. Yeah.
yeah, it's two-thirds of the length of the personal statement. And so in that way, you really want to use this space to try and you can tell a story. You want to be able to create a small narrative. Like these are all somewhat narrative based, and I think it will do you like many more favors to kind of guide a reader through a narrative in a way that helps capture their interest than it is to be factual. And again, we can contrast this with Harvard, where they want to get to the facts as quick as possible, whereas Yale likes to meander about. So while making sure that you have a straight through line, I think this is a place where you can bring up nuances or bring up like questions that you have that you still have. Maybe you don't have answers to them necessarily, or maybe these are more complicated feelings that you have about this issue or this discussion. Or maybe this is kind of a difficulty or like something that you are still working on in your personal experience that you feel like that conflict is fruitful for you in some way intellectually.
Certainly looking at nuance. I would also say is like social maturity, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Or even sociological maturity. So I do think that it is a good point that you make about storytelling. I
Mhm.
do think a 400-word essay gives you a lot more opportunity for that, and it will likely generate a much more compelling, interesting, and more organized essay if you use a specific story, no matter which prompt you pick. You're kind
Mhm.
of required to in the first one. But like even in the second one, where you're talking about community, or in the last one, where you're talking about personal experience, if you pick a specific, like one day this happened
Mhm.
experience to organize what you want to say about a larger phenomenon. For the purposes of like talking about a different type of prompt and how you might approach it, I'd like to walk this through with the community version for
Mhm.
Yale. So reflect on your membership to a community to which you feel connected. Why is this community meaningful to you? And you may define community however you like. The first thing I would say is that you can define community however you like. This
Mhm.
is any collection of people that you identify with for whatever
Mhm.
reason. And so that can be an obvious type of community, or that can be a more
Abstract?
disjointed community, or like, again, however you're thinking about it, it is a group of people that kind of are collective in some way and that you identify with.
Mhm.
When you're picking, like, how do I convey this? Once you picked your community, the next kind of question is, what is a story? Because there's this idea of connection. Connection to this community is at the heart of this question. So then
Mhm.
we go back to this idea. What is a specific story or a specific experience that I feel really embodies my connection to this community?
Right.
Again, think of these as like one day stories. One day, this happened, right?
Mhm.
And like, what is a one day example or anecdote that really encapsulates your connection to this community? So it
Right.
will start with that narrative, tell that story, or at least start telling that story. And as you're telling that story, or as you're reflecting on that story, how am I connected? Like, in what way am I connected? And
Mhm.
like, why does that matter to me? Right?
Mhm.
Part of that, although it doesn't specifically ask this, I do think it's useful to think, again, they are a bunch of doers.
Mhm.
Like, how are you getting involved? And so, like, once you've established that you're connected to this community, I do think it's interesting to reflect on how are you contributing to that community because you are connected to it. So, like, build that out again. It's all part of your story. Even though it does not specifically ask, this is more about the personal experience, you do want to think about how you've been shaped by this community. How have you been shaped by it? And how have you shaped it? That is that kind of reciprocal relationship that kind of establishes some of that meaning and that
Mhm.
relationship between them. Then go back, you're like, okay, phases of reflecting. First phase of reflecting. How am I connected? How do I feel connected? In what ways do I belong to this community? Second phase of reflecting. How is that complicated? How does my membership in this community maybe different or meaningful to me in a way that is not true of my other communities? How is it unique
Mhm.
to this community? How is it like different? How has it shaped me? Like, how am
Mhm.
I different because I am a part of it?
Mhm.
And how I want to be in the future. This isn't future like Harvard future. This is future like, who are you and who do you want to be, as
Mhm.
because you have been part of this community.
I think for me, and I would love to hear your opinions on this. I think about the membership, like communities, whether like large or small, like diffuse or very concentrated. Some of them you may or may not be able to like actively impact with a thing that you've actively done. But I wonder, is there a way for you to display that idea of how would you like to use your understanding of the membership in the community to bring that thought to other places? I don't know if that made any sense because I'm just thinking about your advice in the context of the essay that I wrote, which was again about being Vietnamese and being Vietnamese and not really identifying with it.
Question two and question three have an awful lot in common.
So, what do you think that the separation is between 2 and 3?
So honestly, I think most topics that anyone chooses for two could work for three, and
Mhm.
most topics that people choose for three could also work for two. I
Right.
think the difference is about what you want to talk about. For you, I would not have probably advised you to answer the community question.
Mhm.
I would advise you to think about that as a personal experience. That's more about like, how has this experience shaped me? How has it reframed my understanding of myself and how I relate to the
Okay.
world? So if you want your conclusion and your kind of
Mhm.
nested takeaways to be more internal, more reflective in that way, more kind of oriented around your experiences and your worldview and how that has kind of shaped your perspective, your
Mhm.
answer is probably more personal experience. If you want your conclusion to kind of focus a little bit more on like how you engage with a specific group of people are impacted by, again, focusing on this idea of membership and action within a community, go for community. Both of them could probably sustain similar types of topics. Your
Mhm.
choice of one to the other, and I have literally had students that I have suggested switch topics like at the very end because basically they wanted their conclusion to sound different. So it's just like,
Mhm.
if you want to talk about how your impact, write it as a community essay, just shift it.
Right.
And it takes almost no time, most of the time, to do that shift. And then it ends up fitting better. And if
Right.
you want your conclusion to be more internal, reflective, kind of thinking about your perspective or worldview,
Mhm.
make that more about your personal experience and how that's shaped you.
Okay.
So, like, you can actually use what type of relationship you have with your community
Mhm.
experience as a way to pick which one of these you're likely to fit better with.
That's really good advice. I think that people probably end up having relationships with various communities that they're not totally sure how they want to tell that story. So that's a really good point, just thinking about how, like, what do you want to focus on? The impact outwards or kind of like your inner thought process? And both are actually equally valid.
Might not know when
Yeah.
you write the story which one it
Mhm.
is, and that's okay. So tell your story and then
Mhm.
see what you have to say about it. And
Right.
then you can kind of adjust your essay for
Mhm.
either of those,
Right.
depending on what your takeaway is and what your
Yeah.
conclusion is for
As
yourself.
always, write first and then edit second.
Always edit, edit, revise, revise. Don't
Yes.
panic, but revise. Yeah.